Dzień dobry, nazywam się Błażej Hrabkowicz. Z opóźnieniem, za które przepraszamy, rozpoczynamy spotkanie z bohaterem retrospektywy Octopus Film Festival Richardem Stanleyem. Opóźnienie było związane z złym internetem we francuskich Pirenejach, gdzie przebywa nasz gość, our guest Richard Stanley. Hello to you, sir.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, this is the conversation. We're having the conversation online, but we can say we are at the Octopus Film Festival. I'm here in flesh. You're here in spirit.
It's an absolute pleasure to be with you. Will there be anyone translating into Polish, or?
I think our audience will understand just fine in English. So, I will tell our audience right now that if you want to ask Richard Stanley some questions, you can do it on our Facebook, on the festival Facebook page, and I will choose some questions and ask Richard Stanley your questions if you have any. But I will start with my own. So, first of all, Richard, I'd like to thank you for one thing in particular. Because as we know, and the audience of this festival knows, that Nicolas Cage is an actor who is known for his fantastic phrases, catchphrases in movies. And I want to thank you for giving him another fantastic phrase in Color Out of Space. I mean the moment when he says, "I want these alpacas in the barn by 10 o'clock." Hearing Nicolas Cage saying that just absolutely made my day. So I want to thank you for that. But then speaking about Nicolas Cage and Color Out of Space, the film which we are showing here during Octopus Film Festival, I think that Nicolas Cage is an actor whose style of acting really suits your style of directing and your cinema. And I'm really interested in the way you worked with him and how did you actually start this cooperation with him?
Well, I wanted to work with Nick for many years. In fact, we talked about casting him in Dust Devil all the way back in the early 90s. So we'd been aware of each other's work. And I think essentially everything I do is a kind of dark comedy. On some level, all of my films, I think, have a very dark, evil sense of humor when it comes to the human characters. I find humans often comical and somewhat pointless in the face of the terrible things that go on around them, but which aren't at all funny for me. Like in Color Out of Space, the color and the universe they're in is deadly serious, but the humans in the face of it are, I think, pretty humorous and sad. And Nick, I think, very naturally brings a kind of crazy comedy to everything he does. And even though it doesn't seem like it should be obviously funny, like I knew to give him the word alpaca to say as often as possible. You could play a drinking game and see how many times in Color Out of Space Nick says the word alpaca. But he said it so well that I knew every time, for some reason, with this crazy animal, his lines really landed.
I'm afraid that if we wanted to play a drinking game, like Jesse mentioned, we would have gotten drunk really quickly because he says alpaca a lot in Color Out of Space. You just mentioned you wanted to cast him in Dust Devil. Did you want to cast him in the role that Robert Burke plays, the evil entity? Or something else?
Yeah, there was a consideration to cast Nick when he was still very young in the role of the devil, really, because it's always hard to imagine what the devil would look like. And at that time in the early 90s, I think imagining the devil would be the sexiest man in the world or the most charismatic person, it kind of came down to Elvis Presley, Jim Morrison, and Clint Eastwood. And I think in the end we went down the Clint Eastwood route and went for Robert Burke. I think if we had gone down the Elvis route, it would have been Nick for sure, no doubt. But there was some sense that the way that Nick would play the devil would take the movie in a different way from where it was heading. It was, I'm not unhappy with the choices that we made. I thought Robert was absolutely tremendous in Dust Devil. And in a way, I finally consummated that desire to do something with a slightly more comedic edge with color.
Yeah, that Robert Burke is brilliant. He has this sort of natural charisma that really plays very well in this role. But what I find very interesting in your work, like before Color Out of Space, but in Color Out of Space also, but in Dust Devil and Hardware, you really managed to portray and create really strong female characters. And in both Hardware and Dust Devil, we have, of course, also male characters who are protagonists. But at the end of the day, it's the women who take matters in their own hands and defeat be it the robot or the evil entity, the devil. So I wanted to ask you about that. Were you inspired by some really strong female characters in the genre cinema?
Yeah, to some extent, but it was also mostly my mother. I had an extraordinary mother who raised me to be a genre filmmaker and to be the weird person I am, in the same way that I guess Sarah Connor raises her kid to fight the Terminator. She got me reading weird fantasy by the time I was 6 or 7 years old. By the time I was 10, I had read H.G. Wells, Verne, Lovecraft, Smith, Howard, all the main fantasy authors, and had already seen a lot of strong movies. And I guess because she was a single mother, her philosophy bled through to me. So in the first two movies, really, it's obvious that all the men are completely useless. Particularly in Hardware, they're all tripping or have sexual perversions or are just incompetent. None of them help to actually save Stacy, which is that's kind of reproduced in Dust Devil. There's a similar a kind of incompetence to all the people trying to help save Wendy in that movie too, of course, except for the devil, who Robert Burke. So again, the male characters are in Dust Devil are flawed or kind of useless. So even Zakes, the cop, is so ridden with trouble and doesn't really do anything more than give her a gun without any bullets. So it's debatable how useful any of them are.
Yeah. It's really interesting that because in Hardware, the main character is really the main male character is really overly confident and this sort of macho thing that really contributes to his downfall. And also there is and of course in Dust Devil, Wendy has to do it all by herself. But also I'm really interested in what you just said, that you read all these writers like Lovecraft being very, very young. Really, that seems like if you read Lovecraft in your formative years, I guess then if you said about making movies, these are the movies you make.
Yeah, like I say, she pretty much made me to be a genre filmmaker now in the 21st century, which is yeah, kind of a crazy thing. I mean, the first two movies, my mum was still alive, so I guess I was more heavily influenced by her point of view. By the time I came to Color Out of Space, I was starting to accept that, okay, so some guys might be all right, and my views had softened a bit.
So as the years went by, you acknowledge that there is a masculinity outside toxic masculinity.
Yeah, I think that's represented in Color Out of Space by Elliot Knight's character, Ward, who's actually a good guy. But nonetheless, the tradition continues that none of the characters help in any way to save poor Madeline Arthur, Lavinia, who just never leaves the farm and is like totally not rescued.
Yeah, that is true. You are really not into all the damsel in distress and male hero saving women type of thing.
Yeah, no, I never believed in that archetype. I guess as if I've got any religious views, I'm probably a pagan goddess worshipper, and I admit to a belief in some kind of archetypal mother goddess. Down here in the Pyrenees, this mother goddess is typified as a warrior goddess. She's usually a fierce mother who has a sword and a breastplate, and this image of the fierce protective woman, I think, is very central to everything I've done.
You're talking a lot about your mother and the point of view that her point of view that she instilled in you. Was it her mere strength or the mere fact that she was this kind of person that influenced you, or maybe she had a very strict, very particular view of the world and man and female-male relationships that she just talked to you about?
Yeah, I think she had a pretty fatalistic view of the human race, and because I encountered science fiction novels and pretty hardcore sci-fi. But before I was 10 years old, I managed to read Harry Harrison's Make Room, and a lot of near-future sci-fi. I was super aware of the notion that the future was going to be a nightmare, and Hardware is really a horror movie about the future that way around as well. I was fully expecting a world where which was environmentally depleted, and which it was usually too toxic to go outside unless you're wearing sunglasses or some kind of face mask. And I guess, Hardware grew out of a lot of the stuff that very fearful things that I was reading as a kid. This also led to very strong nightmares. And some of my best work is really coming directly from dreams. The opening 7 minutes of Hardware is really a reproduction of a dream. I dreamt that it's really the same guy from Dust Devil, because I was dreaming about this man, the long coat and hat and the Durango boots for a long time when I was a 13-year-old. And in the stream, he was searching in the desert, and I couldn't tell what he was searching for, and searching, and then he got down on his knees and started digging and dug up this metal droid head, which ended up being the opening scene. And I guess comes straight out of my tormented young adolescent psyche.
Did the story of Hardware sort of come from this image? This image was like first, and then the story came about, or did you came up with the story and then remembered this image from your adolescence?
The second, I came up with the story and then remembered the image. But I wrote my dreams down when I was an adolescent, particularly the ones involving the Dust Devil or the Walking Guy. So a lot of that went into Dust Devil. And weirdly, Hardware grew out of a long Super 8 movie. There's an hour-long Super 8 film I made when I was 16 with my friends, which is really just a very depressing view of Christmas in the 21st century. Had Jill, the scrap metal sculptress, and her one-handed unemployed boyfriend who comes home from the zone with shades, who's on drugs, and but there's no droid in it. It's just a Christmas Eve with these goofy characters in the 21st century, but all the other details, the radiation, the way that she has to run the Geiger counter over them when they come through the door, all that is from the Super 8 version of this 21st century Christmas.
Yeah, the Christmas thing in Hardware, I think, in my opinion, provides us with one of the one of the funniest, darkly comic scenes in your moments in your film when the perverted neighbor is spying on Mo and Jill having sex, and I think in the background we hear a Christmas song. Christmas melody. So this is absolutely hilarious, of course, in a very dark way. But I also wanted to ask you about, we talked a lot about female characters. I wanted to ask you about your male characters, because you just described them as, useless. But they also very often guilt-ridden. They have their demons, which they are fighting. They are struggling to fight them, and they lose this fight. You have this the sheriff in the Dust Devil, but also the Nick Cage character in Color Out of Space, which has this, father figure, if the figure of his father, like sort of hovering above him, and he's struggling with it.
Yeah, and I guess with Zeus Mackay's character, Ben the cop, and Nathan, Nick Cage's character, and to some extent with Dylan McDermott's character, Mo in Hardware, they're also characters who try really hard to do the right thing. They really do try very hard to save their families, to catch the killer, and are basically good men who are confronted with a set of appalling and increasingly unworkable circumstances, which yeah, wear them down and destroy them. So there is that, which is, I guess, as you say, with battling with neuroses usually and guilt issues, which they usually fail to overcome. Certainly, so far in these three movies, it doesn't go well for the male leads. I hope that maybe one day in my next film or a film after that, I might find some redemption for these characters. But that, I guess, propels one to the real Lovecraftian universe, which is the notion of being confronted with something which is like complete obliteration or annihilation, which you don't deserve and which you can't fight and can't really do anything about. There's a helplessness and to all of the characters, which I kind of kind of fascinates me, and I'm particularly interested in very deep trauma and in kind of trauma within trauma, and for me, the stories really take off at the point largely when the characters realize they're going to die. There's usually a point about halfway or 2/3 of the way through the movie where you start to realize, oh shit, they're really not going to get out of this, which is kind of the point where it becomes super interesting for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because this is a very there is a very strong sense in your films about confronting the unavoidable. And it's a bit like Iggy Pop says in as Angry Bob in Hardware, that as for the good news, there is no good news. So you have to confront that and confront the unavoidable. And you talked about Lovecraft, but what I read into that is this. Maybe I'm not reading it correctly, but you have from your films we can read your philosophy of a human being and human race being the only a pawn in a game of major forces which we don't have control over. And this is a pessimistic philosophy that permeates all your work. And I think from your reaction, I gather that I'm reading it correctly.
Yeah, I think this pretty much sums up my feelings about the human condition.
You're a cheerful fellow.
Yeah, the circumstances in which we find ourselves. I mean, I've only been allowed to make 3 feature films so far, complete, finished dramatic feature films. So I don't feel I've really had time to mount a full thesis. And I really hope that one day I'll get The Island of Dr. Moreau completed, which because H.G. Wells is visiting very similar territory to H.P. Lovecraft. Wells also likes to give us lone figures who are usually little people who are incapable of dealing with whatever it is they're facing. Names like Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Britling, kind of slightly small, foolish characters that, like in The Time Machine, are propelled forward in time to face the end of the universe, or the point where the sun is swollen up and is about to engulf the lifeless Earth, or the last human being left in London after the war machines have killed everyone, and who's literally the last one left in the city, and who is so distressed he throws himself on his knees before the tripod, the war machine, and even the Martians are dead. So, Wells gives us the same essentially bleak moment of confrontation, of looking into the abyss. But in Wells's stories, we feel a sense also of not just of humanity, but of bravery, of I guess valor, or something they don't just go mad and crumple like in Lovecraft stories. In Lovecraft's characters can't face it and routinely go mad or die. There's really no other way out of a Lovecraft story other than in death or insanity. But in Wells's stories, we feel there is a daring or some kind of grit in the characters that enables them to get through, and not only that, but potentially grow from that experience. So I'm not totally in a position where I've given up on human beings yet. I think there may be something in them that is worth saving.
Maybe H.G. Wells is really a route for you to make a movie which comes from this view you just mentioned, that the human beings are not entirely useless. But what you just mentioned about Wells really stuck with me, because I guess that's why Steven Spielberg was able to do War of the Worlds, and he wouldn't have been able to do Lovecraft story, because it's not his sensibility, it's not his sensitivity. He wants to
Lovecraft way pessimistic.
Yeah,
there's optimism to Wells that enables one to somehow deal with the immensity of time and the immensity of the cosmos, whereas it just simply crushes the people in the Lovecraft story. But you're speaking of Spielberg and Color Out of Space. We deliberately tried to make the aspects of the first third of the movie looked like it might have been an Amblin movie, a Spielberg production.
Mm-hmm.
It was my first American movie, so I was very pleased to make a slight homage to the golden age of Poltergeist and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But then, of course, it goes a totally different fucking direction from about halfway through.
It does. The direction that I think Spielberg wouldn't have taken this movie in this direction. No. But a nice homage, like you say, because I'm a big Spielberg fan. So for me that was really nice in the film, and of course it makes the completely different route you're taking in the other half of the film that much more striking and more interesting. But you're talking a lot about H.G. Wells and H.P. Lovecraft. Would you characterize them as the most important writers of your life, with the most influential on your work and on your thinking?
Well, certainly Lovecraft has had a huge influence and has continues to haunt my life and enlarge my perception of the world on a daily basis. Scarcely a day goes by without something happening that brings me back to Lovecraft. But really the main thing with Wells and Lovecraft is that they're both in public domain. They're both authors whose stories are copyright free, which means anyone can adapt them. Like right now, anyone out there could make Call of Cthulhu or Island of Dr. Moreau, or utilize the Martian war machines or the Morlocks from the Time Machine. All of these elements are in public domain, which is a pretty huge fictional universe, and also their names that are famous throughout the world. So I know that people in say Angola or Hawaii or some far side of the world won't go to see a Richard Stanley movie, but someone out there will go see an H.P. Lovecraft movie. So I've been fairly good over the years at stalking public domain titles with both Dr. Moreau and Color Out of Space, and trying to grab a ride on them. There's certainly lots of authors I love and admire whose work is still in copyright, which I couldn't go near. But Lovecraft's time is coming, because I've really felt, and it's been the same with Wells, that there haven't been as many great adaptations as there should be. And as a fan, I've been pissed off over the years that there weren't more movies. So it feels like something of a sacred duty to try and take some of the main stories and do strong adaptations of them. At this point in time, we're now working on developing the Dunwich Horror, which is arguably one of Lovecraft's most famous stories. And I'm hoping that we'll find a way of shooting it after the COVID apocalypse that started to wind down.
Yeah, this must be an interesting time. This must be interesting time in terms of a coronavirus pandemic for you, and because with your thinking and your artistic vision, your philosophy, which we're talking about, which we've been talking about for 15 minutes now, this pessimistic view of human beings, sort of confined in a battle with forces they cannot control. This coronavirus pandemic, I can imagine you sitting there watching it unfold and saying, "I told you so."
Yeah, c'est compliqué. I mean, it's not escaped my attention that I couldn't get a movie made for over 20 years after the Moreau affair. And one of the reasons for that wasn't just because of the island of Dr. Moreau, it's because people were more optimistic. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, the apocalyptic mood of the films more suited the time period. But then through the 90s, people started doing too much cocaine, and they washed their hair more often. For a while,
That's the sign of optimism. You do cocaine and you wash your hair very often.
Wearing clean tracksuits and the kind of metal grunge punk stuff that I was doing, the doomy apocalyptic stuff, went out of fashion for a period of time. Now, for some inexplicable reason, a lot of these things are coming back onto the radar again. I think it's because of the ghastly and dramatic circumstances now faced by the human race on the planet. And suddenly, those kind of themes are speaking more strongly to the audience than they might have done for the last 20 years.
Yeah, coronavirus pandemic aside, we have all the climate change thing, which and all the apocalyptic scientific prognosis concerning climate change. So, I guess a good time for artists like you, hopefully, to get some more things done.
Well, it's a good time for artists like me who are mostly are prophets of doom, who have been waving some kind of banner saying we're all fucked for a bunch of years. So I think that right now I'm doing just fine. But the trouble with that is that once the doom happens, you're still unemployed like everyone else. Like if the film industry got wiped out, there'd be no more market for apocalyptic movies. I need to get these things out in a pre-apocalyptic environment. And on that level, I'm really hoping to keep doing that for a few years, because I think there's years of getting worse to come. I suspect that the coronavirus is the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm. It's like for the last 20 years, you were being perceived as this crazy guy in the subway holding the sign of impending apocalypse. You know the type, like in the movies we always say, the crazy guy saying, repent, repent for your sins because the end is coming. You were seen as this guy, but now maybe the times they are changing.
Yeah, it's scary. Definitely scary. I mean, I remember trying to pitch a movie set in a flooded right-wing dictatorship, future England, back in the 90s somewhere, and telling the people, if you don't make this film, it will happen.
I guess they were absolutely overwhelmed by that, and of course agreed to finance the movie.
No, sadly not. Yeah, there hasn't been a decent deluge submersion of London post Greenhouse movie yet. Hopefully, someone will make one.
Hopefully. Speaking about moving away from the philosophy for a second, speaking about the aesthetics of your film, the visual style of your film, which is, you mentioned the dreams, and it doesn't surprise me because it's all very dreamy-like, the aesthetics and the visual style of your film. But also you mix a lot of genres together, because there is horror, sometimes there's spaghetti western, like Dust Devil is a very spaghetti westerny in a way. But what was your inspiration for your visual style? Who was the most influential? Which artists were the most influential in sort of, you creating your visual style, your imagination?
I think just as in terms of cinematic influences, I owe a huge debt to Italian cinema, notably to Sergio Leone and to Dario Argento. Both of whom hugely inspired me as a teenager. And it was really the use of the widescreen, and also the way that they married visuals to sound. The very successful marriage of Ennio Morricone's music to the spaghetti westerns, or Goblin in Argento's movies, and really got me thinking about composing these scores in advance.
I liked the fact that Argento played the Suspiria soundtrack on the set of Suspiria and had people literally moving to the music, which because the Italian movies never recorded live sound, they dubbed everything. So there's a very different, very organic feeling than you got in a lot of the a lot of the accompanying American movies. But out of American cinema of that period, I'd have to name Tobe Hooper from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and probably Don Coscarelli, who I love and adore, both of whom really influenced me in terms of the black comedy. I see that Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1 and particularly Chainsaw 2 are, for me, are really black comedies. And I find Tobe Hooper getting laughs out of places that no sane person should get a laugh from. Yet I'm laughing with him. Such as the sequence where the girl is trussed up over the bucket in Chainsaw 2, which is a scene you really should never laugh at, but at the same time it's funny.
I do believe that it was Sam Raimi who said that, in his opinion, the genres which are closest to each other are comedy and horror. That it may seem, counterintuitive, but they're really, really close to each other.
Very, very close. And I think Raimi also uses the term splatstick. Rather than slapstick, and this is something that's always stuck with me. And you can see it all the way through to Color Out of Space with the timing of the head explosions, and that they usually fall roughly where a custard pie or some kind of slapstick gag would fall, and it's horrible because you still get a laugh a lot of the time. Like the audience is used to the style of it, and often it means you're getting a laugh out of the audience in a really inappropriate place. Like I guess influenced by Toby, we can think of I don't want to spoil the movie too much, but there's a particularly grim thing that Nick has to do with the shotgun in the attic at the end of Color Out of Space, involving the other cast members, and you get a big laugh from the audience at that moment, even though they really shouldn't be laughing at something so brutal and ghastly, which is, as a father killing their own children, and so.
But I'm a big fan of Tobe Hooper, and particularly the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because aside from the black comic thing, I think it's a masterpiece of terror. It has massacre in the title, but there is not a lot of this massacre in the first part. There's just this sense of dread, and sense of terror. And my last thing I wanted to discuss with you was sort of the balance between storytelling and visual, imagination and visually creating the world in the film. Because when I watch your films, I always get a sense that you're not so much into classic storytelling, and if you can abandon the classic storytelling for a second just to have more time and space to create the universe of the film visually, you will always do that. And that is my impression when I'm watching your films, and I wondered if you'd agree with that.
Yeah, again, it's in some part coming from Italian cinema. And again, coming back to Dario Argento and I guess his mentor, Mario Bava, I've always thought that movies were dreams to begin with, that you're kind of taking the audience into a shared dream. So you're already in a very dreamlike space. And something very special seems to happen when you're able to really free yourself from the narrative and the demands of the plot. For instance, the moment in Dario Argento's Inferno where the girl goes through the floor into an underwater basement and finds herself in a completely underwater room is like one of the most dreamlike things I've ever seen in a movie. It makes no kind of plot sense, or the narrative coherence is often lost in the course of achieving these moments. So I hope that I've managed to retain enough central narrative coherence to anchor together enough of these maybe you could call them psychogenic moments. And I've tried to structure all of the movies a bit like psychedelic or I guess shamanic experiences, so that they usually start in a very at a very normal pace, in a place where it's fairly easy for the audience to enter the narrative, and as a result, they've usually got pretty slow first thirds. so that by about halfway through, you're thinking, "Is this shit really working? Or, am I not coming up yet?" And then suddenly, like little things start to show up, and then it amps up and up. And the idea is to try and eventually propel the viewer headlong into some kind of experience which is larger than one's normal perception. I guess in hardware that happens with the Moe's trip sequence, and where the film really steps out of the cyberpunk box and starts to go somewhere pretty I guess sort of cyber shamanic, or at least develop some kind of weird spiritual core. And Color Out of Space also does that, and Dust Devil, the entire last third is pretty out there in terms of its setting in time and space, and kind of wanders into slightly Cocteau territory. And all of them also they're all transgeneric. I mean, you mentioned before Dust Devil's essentially an African Western road movie, horror movie, romance. It's also got a nice dance scene. Hardware is kind of a sci-fi action horror movie with some Western trappings. And you go.
Yeah. I just wanted to invite our audience, because we're wrapping up. Invite our audience to see your films here during Octopus Film Festival: Hardware, Dust Devil, and Color Out of Space. Richard Stanley was with us right now, coming live from the French Pyrenees, I guess, if I remember correctly.
And the French Pyrenees are out there. It's true.
Yeah. So thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for this conversation. Have a nice time in France.
It's a pleasure, sir. Enjoy the movies. And, try and have a drink first, or if you've got any psychedelics, now is the time.
Let's heed that advice. And once again, thank you. Richard Stanley was with us.
Yeah, take care out there.